Peace. The God in me bows before the God in each one of you. I want to welcome you to another episode of Integrating the Sacred, where we endeavor to open ourselves up to the mind of God, the light of God, and then open our hearts to the love of God so that we can be living a divine life here and now, and so that we can manifest that divine light and that divine love in the world. That's why we meet. It's simple but profound, and we do it by prayerfully contemplating the teachings and the person of Jesus. So the gospel reading for today is, again, from the Sermon on the Mount, and it's very, very challenging. Before I jump into it, let me just talk about what the Sermon on the Mount represents. First of all, there's all kinds of levels of human wisdom and human knowledge. A lot of it comes from experience, trial and error. Some of it comes from common sense. Some of it comes from inductive and deductive reasoning, all valid levels of wisdom. However, there's another level of wisdom, and that's what we refer to as transcendental wisdom. What do I mean by that? It is the very mind of God and the very will of God, often expressed by an avatar, a divine incarnation like Jesus. Literally, in the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is giving us is the mind of God, what it looks like, what it feels like to truly be a spiritual person, to be truly living out of some level of conscious contact with God. And it's not just true for Christians, it's true everywhere for all people. There's no such thing as a Christian truth and a Hindu truth. Ultimately, there's just God's revealed truth that is valid for everyone, everywhere, at all times. In the Kriya tradition, for example, we honor Krishna and his teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, but we don't honor it as a kind of exclusively Hindu program. The truth in the Bhagavad Gita applies to all of us at all times and all places. So that's what the Sermon on the Mount is. It's the distilled wisdom, will, and pure knowledge of God expressed in time and space. It's important to understand that, because Jesus' words today are very challenging. He says, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies. And pray for those who persecute you. Many years ago, I was teaching a class and reflecting on these very words of Jesus, and a very intelligent woman raised her hand and said, what Jesus is asking us to do is counterintuitive. We have this fight or flight response, and when we're confronted with an enemy, we're either supposed to fight or flight or take flight. That's what our instincts are telling us. So what Jesus is asking us to do is something that is not possible for human beings. It's not humanly possible. And I responded by saying, you're right, at one level. That if we just understand what it means to be human, that we are merely rational animals, then this is impossible. But the good news is that we're not merely rational animals. We are made in the divine image. We are each a spark of the divine. There is something within all of us that transcends all of our human instincts and tendencies. It is the image of God. It is this divine spark. It is the Atman. It is the soul made in the divine image. We are meant to walk planet Earth, not as rational animals, but as sons and daughters of the living God. We're meant to live our life as God's, lowercase g, in the context of the life and the love and the light of God. So, let me begin to break this down. First of all, you have to remember that Jesus was Jewish, and I mean this as a compliment. He was very practical. He understood life. And it's very interesting. He's not saying that if you're spiritual, if you're enlightened, if you're God-realized, that you won't have enemies. He's saying you're going to have enemies. And what do we mean by enemies? We're going to have people who don't like us. We're going to have people who maybe at times hate us. We're going to have people who work against our best interest. We're going to have people in our lives who try to stymie our happiness in some way, shape, or form. That's virtually unavoidable. So Jesus is being very practical. He's not being idealistic. He's saying you're going to have enemies. What makes us spiritual is how we respond to our enemies. And yeah, we can respond from that fight or flight place, or we can respond from love. So let me just talk about what I think Jesus means by love and all of the great masters, what they mean by love. There's a feminine and a masculine side to love. The feminine side is being able to see and appreciate that divine spark that is in everyone, and that is the essence of every human being, whether they manifest it or not. Let me put it in this context. I have 2 adult sons, and they're wonderful. They're in their 40s. And I see them as, 40-something adults living their lives, being married, working at their profession. I see all of that. But I also see what I saw the day they were born. The first time I held them in my arms, I saw that they are precious. I saw that they have been made in God's image. I saw that they uniquely reflect that divine essence, that divine light. I saw that they were inherently lovable. Now, if we human beings can love that way, that's how God loves us. God isn't oblivious to our self-destructive behavior. God isn't oblivious to the suffering that we impose on others. God isn't oblivious to the fact that we all act like an enemy to someone or something at different points in our life. God sees that. But when God looks down on us from above, so to speak, when God looks down on us, he sees that divine spark. And above everything else, he sees that divine image. He sees that we are his beloved children. Again, it doesn't mean that God is ignorant of our wrongdoings, but God sees that divine spark. He sees that in us. And God never stops cherishing us. Now, that's part of what Jesus means by loving. He doesn't mean you're going to like your enemies. He doesn't mean you're not going to put somebody who, commits a heinous crime. Doesn't mean you're not going to put them in jail. It doesn't mean that sometimes, unfortunately, where we are in the evolution of the human race, that sometimes force will be needed to stem the tide of evil. He's not saying none of that is true. He's just saying, see, your enemy is ultimately your brother. See your enemy is ultimately your sister. See that divine spark in them that maybe they're not manifesting and they're not even aware of it. But look inside their heart and soul and see that. Sometimes I will just pray when I'm in a situation where I feel like somebody is coming against me in a not healthy way, I will just pray, God, remind me that they have been made in your image and likeness. Remind me that you love them as much as you love me. That helps me to transcend that my own fight or flight response. The second aspect of love is the more masculine aspect. And again, it's not liking the other person. It's not saying you have to be friends with your enemy. It doesn't mean you're going to have warm feelings, but you seek to serve their highest good. That's what love in action means, that you're seeking to serve their highest good. I'll go to one of my heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King, and he had enemies, and he challenged the enemies with truth and love. But his ultimate goal, and this is a quote, was to welcome the wayward brother or sister back into the beloved community. He was seeing the divine image in them, even as enemies. And he was always, even by speaking hard truths, he was seeking to serve their highest good. Do you see how that works? So when Jesus said, pray for your enemies, he doesn't mean pray that your enemy's agenda against you will be realized. If you don't like the president or some past president, it doesn't mean when you pray for them that you're praying for the success of their policies. No. It means you're praying that they can be open to God's highest wisdom so that they could do good for all people. That's what it means to pray for your enemies, is you're praying that they may have God's mind, they may have God's love, so that they can become an instrument of God's love and wisdom in the world. All right? It's simple, but it's not easy. So let me talk about how we nurture this in our lives. Let me start here. I've lived long enough that I know I've made some mistakes. I know that I've hurt people. I know that I haven't always been the highest version of myself. And yet, I know that God has been very merciful to me. I know that the Kriya Gurus have been very patient with me. I know that Jesus has loved me unconditionally. I know the Divine Mother, Mary, the Blessed Mother, has and is very patient with me, long-suffering. When I realize that, what necessarily happens is that my heart opens. My heart literally opens, and I feel gratitude for that mercy, for that compassion, for the patience. And then something occurs to me. If God has been so patient with me, so understanding, so long-suffering, then shouldn't I be long-suffering and patient with my enemies? Now, again, it doesn't mean that I let them walk all over me, all right? It doesn't mean anything like that. It's nothing codependent. It's just that I realize that I am living the life I'm living today, which is a really blessed life. God has been so good to me. Not because I was perfect, but because God was understanding and God was merciful and God was compassionate with me. Can't I seek then to pass that on to other people? And the answer is yes. A couple of other points. I used to wonder why God could be so merciful to me and to others. And I had a wonderful Franciscan priest many years ago who explained it to me this way. God understands why we do the stupid things we do because God understands everything that came before our stupid actions. God understands our woundedness. God understands our fears. God understands our trauma. God understands our ignorance. God understands it all. And therefore, he has mercy. Therefore, God is compassionate. If we can extend that to our enemies and the people that aggravate us and annoy us, just remembering that they too have their stories. They too have their childhoods. They too had dysfunctional parents. I remember a very poignant moment in my own healing from my childhood wounds. A wise therapist said to me, have you ever thought about the fact that your parents had parents and that their parents weren't perfect and that they had wounds and trauma from their childhood that spilled over into their parenting? He said, it doesn't make it right. But can you understand that they too were limited and that they were doing the best that they possibly could, even when the best wasn't good enough, because they have a history? And that just switched on a light in me and allowed me to be compassionate and forgiving with my parents' limitations, but also, again, extending that to my enemies, that they have their own trauma, they have their own stories, and I may not understand it, but God does. Can I be patient with them too? Again, without being codependent. And the last piece is maybe the most important advice that I can give today. Again, completely, entirely on a human level, it's impossible to love in the way that Jesus is telling us to love. But God, who is love, loves all of his creatures, all of her children. This is my point. This is why starting the day with meditation and prayer is so important. This is why praying is so important. And praying isn't just repeating prayers we learned in our childhood. Prayer, like meditation at the deepest level, it's lifting our minds and our hearts to God. And as we lift our minds and our hearts to God, God, again, infuses our minds with wisdom, just like he infused the mind of Jesus. And God fills our heart with love, just like he filled Jesus' heart with love. And it's out of that conscious contact with God, with the source of all love, with the source of all compassion, that we are able to love in the way that Jesus is challenging us to love. Right? Again, that conscious contact with God through prayer and meditation is so very crucial. We can't do what Jesus is asking us to do without it. Make meditation, make contemplative prayer, make sincere prayer the foundation of your life. Lift your mind and heart to God whenever you're overcome with hatred, with fear, with anger. Again, we're going to have moments where we feel those feelings, but we don't have to have those moments overshadow us. Those moments do not have to control us. All we have to do is witness with compassion, take a step back, maybe disengage from the person for a while, but then ultimately, again, lift our minds and our hearts towards heaven, towards God. God will give us that loving energy that we need. I'll close with a quote from my favorite Jesuit priest. He was also a great scientist, Teilhard de Chardin. Love is the most powerful force in all of creation and the least understood. My qualification to that quote is, as we acknowledge God's mercy and love towards us, we understand it more. As we pray, lifting our hot minds and our hearts to God, we understand it more. When we meditate, let go of our squabbles, our anger, and we just rest in God's silent but blissful love. we understand love, and then we become God's love in the world. God bless you. Have a good week. If you like this video, please give it a like, make a comment, and forward it to your friends. Blessings.